Swagatam. I'm Untitled Chapter, journalist and woodworker based in Greater Noida, India. I make a lot of my projects using discarded wood, recycled wood, old furniture, old doors which have been ripped out of old buildings and window frames. You often get very nice wood. And in this video I'll show you how I made a small bedside table using some wonderful teak that I've got from an old bed which once belonged to my wife's parents. This is the beautiful teak I reclaimed. I've milled the pieces and we are all set to go. To make this table, we've got to start by making the joinery for the legs. So first thing is to identify the pieces. These three pieces are going to be for the back legs. These are the two legs and this is the rail. And for the front, they're going to be these two legs and this rail. So we are going to cut tenons on both sides of this rail and matching mortises on the legs or in the stiles. And in order to do this, we need two kinds of marking gauges. This one for setting the depth of the tenon, and this one for setting the width of the mortise and the tenon, which in this case is going to correspond to the width of this chisel, this half-inch chisel, which I'm going to use to cut the mortises. So the tenons and the mortises have to match. So the first thing that is to be done is to mark the length of the tenons, which I do with this gauge. Then I'll set this marking gauge and mark the tenons as well as the mortises, and then use this mortising chisel to chop the mortises. The first few cuts have to be made very carefully, and you have to ensure that you do not move outside the lines marked. The mortise is ready. All I have to do is clean up the walls, the inner walls of the mortises a bit. Now that we've chopped all the mortises, we need to do the tenons, like this one. These tenons have to be cut very, very accurately so that it fits properly into the mortise holes. I'm not a terribly skilled woodworker, so in order to cut tenons accurately, I've made a simple little jig. This jig is nothing but two pieces of wood. There's this square piece which has been screwed on to this other piece of wood, and this piece has two magnets, against which the saw can rest while it is cutting. So what this jig basically does is guide the saw while it's cutting the tenon. So I put this against the tenon stock, clamp it on, and then with the saw I make my cut. It just helps me make a more accurate cut. The operation of this jig is pretty simple. I basically butt it against the tenon stock and see where the tenon has been marked. Now if it is too close or too far away, I can adjust it with these shims, which are nothing but my visiting cards. So what I do in this case is just put these shims this way and clamp the whole thing. Keep my tenons a little wide, a little thick, so that I can pare it down to the exact size when I am to fit it to the mortise. Cutting the shoulder accurately is also very, very important, because if you don't cut this accurately, then the tenon will never sit properly. Now, to make this task a little easier, I've made this simple jig. It's again a very, very simple jig, nothing but a piece of wood onto which another piece, a smaller, thinner 1-inch strip has been screwed on. This is at 90 degrees to the edge. And the way it works is I just butt it against the line marked to cut the shoulder of the tenon, and then take a cross-cut saw and cut. This ensures that the saw doesn't wiggle and it cuts straight and perpendicular. Before we continue, I'd like to make a couple of points. The first is about these accessories which I've used to help me sew the tenons. Now, I've called them jigs, but really I don't think they are jigs. I don't think you could call them jigs because they are so rudimentary. They're actually sewing guides, just plain sewing guides, little strips of wood screwed on together to help you make the cuts. Lastly, in this video, I've been using Japanese saws to cut my tenons, but that's not essential. You can use any kind of saws. You can use Western saws or whatever. But my personal preference is Japanese saws. And if you do use a Japanese saw, I have a caution for you. Most Japanese saws are meant for soft and medium hardwoods, not really for hardwoods. So if you're going to cut hardwood, like I have cut in this instance, the wood that I used is teak, I suggest you get an appropriate saw. So there are Japanese saws like this one, which is meant for hardwood. All the mortises and tenons have been cut. A total of 12 mortises and tenons. Quite a bit. One last thing before glue up is to mark and cut tapers on the ends of the table legs. The quality of cut is so good that I don't think I need to even go over it with a plane. Just a bit of sandpaper will do. Now it's time to glue the table frame together. I do this in two parts. First, the two side frames are glued and assembled. With the sides ready, the final assembly can proceed. After letting the glue set overnight, it is time to unclamp the frame assembly. The frame is ready, and now we've got to think of how to fix the top. This is going to be the top, a piece of teak which has been lying around, and I've shellacked it, given it a shellac finish, and we'll have to attach this to that frame. Now, as most of you know, wood contracts and expands according to the seasons. In the monsoons, it swells up with moisture and it expands, and in the other months, in winter and in the summer months, it contracts. Now, if you fix it onto a frame, then it will not allow for the movement of wood, the natural movement of wood. So what usually happens is we find a lot of tops of tables and desks cracking over the years. Now, to prevent this, there are many ways of doing it. The way that you attach it to the frame should allow for the movement of wood. I'm going to use these wooden buttons that I've made. These are turn buttons. The way that you attach them is they're fixed to the underside of the tabletop, and this bit goes into a mortise in the table frame. After fixing the top, I attached the bottom shelf with a couple of screws. The table at this point is ready.